Woo! Yeah! You're on the Hillbilly Voodoo channel. Today we're going to take this pile of ground obtainium and try to turn it into a 90-degree gearbox. Is it going to work? I have no idea, but we're going to try it. Stick around, watch the Hillbilly Voodoo in action, and see what we come up with. So why are we doing this? Well, we're building ourselves a Sherp style ATV. Big, huge tires, hopefully going to be amphibious. Right now we have a rototiller engine on there powering it with a horizontal shaft. You notice that motor's pretty small. Those tires are pretty big. That motor doesn't have electric start. It makes everything go round and round and would probably do the job, but I'm lazy. I like electric start. And I have a rather large number of vertical shaft engines, and they all have electric start. So we're going to try to make a 90-degree gearbox that we can run the vertical shaft on a horizontal shaft. So what we currently have sitting here on our little work table is the spindles out of a riding lawnmower deck. They stick through the bottom of the deck. Your blade goes on there, it goes spinny round and round, and that's what cuts your grass. They have bearings inside of them. I'm hoping that we can use those bearings for our little 90-degree shaft here. What we also have is a chunk of round stock, a chunk of axle tube that is pretty thick, and we have the side and spider gears out of a Dana 44 differential. So, what are we going to do with all this stuff? Well, like I say, we're going to try to build a 90-degree gearbox. So I'll show you with a little illustration here of what I'm hoping to create. Now, what I'm trying to come up with here is a box with a shaft coming in this direction and a shaft going out that direction with some gears on it. So that we can power in this direction. The output comes out this direction, just changes 90 degrees of what our... I'm sure you guys are following along. Most of my subscribers are pretty intelligent, so they probably got an idea of what I'm trying to go along with here. Now, what I have is, like I said, the side gears and the spider gears out of a Dana 44 differential. Now, I was going to use both the spider gears because they're the same size, and that would give us just 1-to-1. But they don't mesh. You don't get a 90-degree out of that. You get like a, I don't know, maybe a 22.5 or something, which I didn't really know. I thought that, yeah, because they are in differential, I figured that they would mesh together and they would form a perfect 90-degree, but it doesn't. So we were going to have to use one of the side gears. Spider gear meshes into the side gear at a perfect 90-degree. You guys can see that? It does its thing. The only problem with this is going to be we're going to be a 1.5. So I don't know if that's really going to affect how everything performs or not. We can always compensate with the sprockets that we're going to be driving these shafts with, but yeah, you guys kind of probably get where I'm going here with this. We got some, like I said, there's bearings inside of these spindles. I don't think we'll use the spindle housings themselves. We'll probably build ourselves some new housings out of this rather large hunk of metal here, this axle tube. And we also have a couple bearings out of an old go-kart axle. Now these are self-centering bearings, so I'm not 100% sure they're going to work for what we're doing here, but we're going to try them out anyways because this is a 1-inch shaft, and I believe that these are maybe 7/8, maybe smaller, I'm not sure, but we're going to put this together. Well, we're going to try to put this together and see what we can figure out here. And if all this works, then I also have a bunch of blown up Dana 60s, some corporate 14s, some bigger ones, a lot bigger side gears, a lot bigger spider gears. So if this whole plan works out here, then we could probably build, well, another one out of beefier stuff, but enough yapping. Let's disassemble one of these and see what we have inside for bearings. So let's see what we find inside of these things. It's been quite a while since I've taken one of these bearings apart, so if I remember right, if we pull this nut off, this pulley comes off, and we can drive that shaft out through the inside, if I remember right. You want to save the threads, put your nut back on. Looks like somebody ran over some probably baling twine at one time. Filled that all up. That's probably not super good for the lower deck. And we have some bearings in there, as I suspected. Now, how are we going to get those bearings out of there? So let's go find something that I can stick that over, maybe a piece of pipe, or I found an old gear to set this up on, and I grabbed an actual punch, so maybe we can get this bearing out of here without. Well, there's that. See, there's a spacer in there. I would assume so that the bearings don't get smashed together. And we have ourselves a bearing. Probably use a little bit of grease, but it should be good enough for putting together what we're going to put together here. Now we'll take the bearing out of the other side here. Socket's perfect. There. So now we got two bearings, and we got the other two bearings. So this is what we got going on so far. We got two bearings, we got our spider gear. Now, spider gear has a hole in the center. Spider gear hole in the center is that big. Bearing is that big. So obviously we can't use the same size shaft. So what we're going to need to do is build a shaft that we can put that side gear or spider gear on the end of. These bearings like that, and hold it all together. You guys kind of sort of following along? Well, if not, just keep watching. We will put this in the lathe, turn this down so we can put that spider gear on the end, and then we will turn it down so we can slide these bearings over. Does that make sense? Well, I don't know whether it makes sense or not, but that's what we're going to do. I got our piece of round stock turned down here now so that the gear fits over that end, and I flipped it around and I've turned it down so that the bearing fits over this end, goes all the way up. Now I'm going to try my hand at cutting a keyway in this with my lathe. So I have sharpened a bit, just a chunk of high-speed steel to that goofy little profile there. It's just a little bit narrower than my key stock, and I've started running it back and forth. Tighten it up on there like that. I don't know if you guys can see or not, but put a little bit of pressure on it, and it's slowly cutting a keyway in there. Is this gonna work? I don't know, I've never done it before, but can you guys see? I'm kind of jerking around here, but the light isn't very good. But it's slowly cutting a keyway. If you do it like this, if I can, it'll be pretty cool, because like I said, I've never cut a keyway like this before. I usually just end up filing one or going super hillbilly and using the grinder, but maybe this will be a little more precision. See, it seems to be taking a little curly shave off every time I go back and forth, so I don't know, it might work. It doesn't look like that turned out too terribly badly. The key stock fits in there pretty tight. Might have to clean the bottom up a little bit with a file, but yeah, kind of another thing that I learned today, and I guess you're never too old to learn stuff. And clean it up a little bit with a file, and it should hold a key and do what keyways are supposed to do. So I've got our shafts machined up here now for our gears. I made another one with the 1-inch bearings and the big side gear. So now we got to figure out some sort of housing to hold these together. Yeah, lack of housing seems to be a real problem nowadays. Haha, sad dad joke. But anyways, we need something to hold these bearings for both of these. So I got this big huge chunk of axle tube here. I'm going to chop it in half, machine it so that the bearings fit inside, and then we'll go from there, see what we need to do to mesh these two things at a 90-degree angle here. I got our bearing housings machined out here now. Now I put a shoulder on the back here so that when we feed it into our little box, it's got something to bump up against. Stay square. Same with this one. Now let's pop some bearings in here. This one's a little bit loose, it might have to be staked, but yeah, we can do that later once we figure out if this is all going to work. Let's put the bearing in this one. So these ends are obviously going to have to be trimmed off after I weld our little gear thingies on here, but looks like we got some housings with some bearings in them. Oh, that's kind of cool. They actually don't look too bad, but hey, looks aren't everything. So I'm going to take our chunk of square stock here, and I'm going to cut off a section. Outside looks really. I'm going to cut off a section that is the exact same length as it is square. And I'm thinking that if I poke a hole right through the center of that square, then I can take that one and go like that, and then figure out the distance that I need on this side to put that one in like that. Piece off. So, again, crappy calipers from a garage sale. Don't worry about the tips. I guess rust is kind of like nature's bluing. Nice thin layer of rust. You can scribe a nice line on there that you can see. Now that I'm sitting here feeling this steel, it's pretty thin. I think it's only like an 1/8 inch wall, so I'm probably going to have to cut another steel plate that I can put on here like that, like a square piece that I can bolt down. Yeah, does that make sense? Anyway, something thicker, because this is pretty thin, and I could see the forces pushing the gears apart and doing all kinds of prying and weird stuff, especially on something this thin. So we'll cut a steel plate that's the same size as here, bore the same hole in there, shoulder that up. Yeah, that's kind of making sense. Well, let's go cut this out and see if it makes sense once we look at this piece cut out. Well, I changed the chuck in the lathe here, and I've mounted up our little square box type thing here. I'm going to bore a hole in here that will be big enough to hold that. And like I said, I'm going to put another plate of steel over the top of here. I will probably weld that piece to here and then bolt that in there. That kind of sounds like a good idea. Then I can take it apart. But first I'm going to bore this hole in here and kind of get an idea of where those gears and everybody are going to line up on the inside of that little box. I got our little holes bored through our box here, and our little bearing housings fit in there like that. So now I think while I have that 4-jaw chuck in the lathe, I'm going to cut some steel plates that will, well, some square pieces for here. And I'm going to bore the same size hole in those steel plates so that we can use the bearings and all that to line it up and drill mounting holes. That just kind of sounds like a good idea. And I already have the 4-jaw chuck in the lathe, so might as well do this now before I change the chuck back out. I'm obviously going to have to play with the depth on the inside of here so that the gears mesh properly and sit properly in there. You can see a bit of a wear pattern that's on the gears from when they were in the differential, so I'm assuming that if I set that wear pattern pretty much the same as what it was before, then because these were all doing their thing in a differential at one time, then they should be doing their thing in this 90-degree gearbox here. Hope this thing works. If it does, it'll be kind of cool because I can build another one or more of them and use them on other projects. I was thinking of turning a motorcycle into a tuk-tuk, and this would be perfect for just sliding onto the sprocket output of the motorcycle, and the shaft coming out this direction will go right back to a car differential, so that'll be kind of neat. I could also somehow put another gear in there and have the shaft shift back and forth from one side to the other, and that would give me forward and reverse on a motorcycle engine. It's all kinds of neat ideas that I could come up with for something like this. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's actually see if we can make this work. Bored us out a plate here. It's going to go on there like that. I'm going to drill some holes through the corners so that I can bolt this all together. It's going to be a press fit. It's fairly tight up to there, and then it presses on the rest of the way. So I can press it on and hopefully get my gear depth there. And if not, then maybe we'll have to like shim it in and out kind of thing or something. We'll figure that out, but I'm gonna go poke those holes in there and make a plate for the top here. It's gonna be the exact same, so. So if my somewhat well-laid plans are correct here and my measurements are correct, these pieces should go together. Should. I'm not going to send these straight home yet. Just going to line them up with the back because, like I said, I don't really... Well, no, let's drive them down because then we can line it up and make sure our holes are going to be lined up properly, and then we can set the depth. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it doesn't have to go all the way because we just need that lip there, right? So... yeah, that'll do it. Let's see if this one will go in there. If you're worried about me mushrooming this and the bearing not fitting, there's a reason I'm not worried about it, is because this bearing size on this side was loose. So actually by hammering on this is going to probably be a good thing because it'll keep the bearing in there a little tighter. So now we can line those up, maybe, yeah, like that. And we can mark our holes and drill it, and everything should be square, I hope. Kind of looks like it's going to work. Maybe. Let's go poke some holes in here and mount these to the square, and we'll go from there. We got all our holes drilled in our little box here, and I welded nuts on the inside of the holes because this is not thin enough to really tap. I've assembled everything here kind of how I think it should go. I set the depth with the smaller spider gear, not the side gear. Side gear's base straight out, and I set the depth on this side. Now, I haven't welded these gears to the shafts yet, but they seem to spin pretty nice, and they are in the pattern that they were before. So they're rubbing on where they were when they were in the differential, so I'm hoping that's going to work properly. Everything's all tacked in place here. Now I'm going to tack these gears. I don't know if you guys can see or not, but I'm going to tack these gears onto the shafts in here. They seem to be spinning okay. A little bit noisy, but there's no gear, no grease or anything in there, so I'm going to tack these gears onto these shafts, see if they still spin properly, and then I will take them out and weld them properly. As long as they're spinning properly, then I'll take them out, weld them properly, and I think that might be it. I'm going to put collars on the outside here that will hold the shafts in place. The gears on the inside will hold the shafts, the collars on the outside will hold the shafts. Can unbolt it, slide it all apart. I could replace the bearings if I need to, because pull the collar off, the shaft will come out. Kind of looks like a real thing here. We'll all tack these shafts up, and then we'll see if it's going to work or not. So our gears are all welded onto our shafts, and I covered up the end holes here with a plate of steel on both sides so that no fingers get in there and get chewed up, and so that I can fill this inside of this cavity with grease, and hopefully those gears will not wear too bad. Got a little bit of gear noise there, but like I said, there's no grease in there now, so they're dry. When I get some collars to lock this in place, if you pull back on the shaft a little bit, then there's no noise. So let's test this thing out. Well, that's that, guys. Looks like it's gonna work. Wasn't making a whole bunch of huge grindy noises, and there's no grease in there, so that's a good thing. Yeah, not bad for a bunch of junk that wasn't good enough for anybody else's yard, built on a machine that wasn't good enough for anybody else, and yeah. So now we have a 90-degree drive that we can use a vertical shaft engine, or we could use that in pretty much anything where we want to change the direction of travel of our shafts. So I think I'll leave this video here. Till next time, use what you got to make what you want. I'll see you guys later.